Hallo und herzlich willkommen zum Private Banking Kongress in Hamburg. Ich stehe hier mit Stuart Empson, Investmentdirektor für Aktien bei Aviva Investors. Thanks for joining us at the Private Banking Congress. A lot has happened across the markets. From your vantage point at Aviva Investors, how has the global investment landscape changed in 2025?
Well, hello, Benita. Thank you very much for having me here. It's great to be in Hamburg. And you're right, it's changed a lot. Maybe you could describe it as a new world order. Lots you could worry about or think about, but shall we try and distill it into three key things? Let's look at tariffs, let's look at government debt, and also let's look at US supremacy. So let's just take each one of those in turn. Tariffs, hard to get away from that. We're talking about it right now behind me. Whilst there's been some good art of the deal, and actually there has been a reduction in the trade deficit of America and its trading partners in the short term, what you can't get away from is the average global tariff rate is going to go from about 3% up to nearly 15%. That is the highest it's going to be in 85 years. It's really hard to see a case where that does not negatively affect economic growth, inflation, or interest rates. So that's sort of point one. Point two was rising levels of government debt. It's quite staggering to now think that the US spends more on servicing its interest for its debt than it does on defense. Bond markets have started to get very nervous about this. Equity markets have been quite calm, but they might not be in the future. And then the final point is on US supremacy. It's been a fantastic place for investing over the last couple of years. But with all of this going on in the background, there are starting to become question marks over US supremacy.
So what does this mean for the United States dominance on the financial markets?
Yeah, it's a really good, interesting question. One of the ways I would think about it is look at concentration, particularly with the rise of passive investing. Do clients really understand the concentration in markets? If you look at the moment, about 35% is the weight of the top 10 stocks in the S&P 500. To put that into context, the highest that got previously was back at the beginning of the century in the dot-com bubble, which obviously burst. We know how that ended. So that is a potential reason for investors to be concerned. And put it another way, the top 7 countries in the MSCI All-Country World Index, so global equities, the top 7 companies rather, now account for a greater weight than the top 7 countries in the same global index after the United States. That is quite staggering. So still a fantastic place to invest, but something to be mindful of.
And how does Aviva Investors recommend their clients to invest now in the current market volatility?
Well, I think seek some resilience and seek some diversification. It goes back to a little bit of the answer to the previous question. When you've got such high concentration in the general market, perhaps thinking about some resilience to protect on some further volatility and some diversification to help protect on this increasing concentration is probably a wise thing to think about.
So the core of your strategy are dividend-paying equities. Why might they be a more stable alternative to US equities?
Yeah, I mean, US equities is still a really interesting place to invest, and you can find lots of good income-paying stocks in the US market. But if we take a step back and look a bit more broadly, let's go back to basics. Why are companies that pay dividends a potentially attractive option for investors? Well, really, because they've made this implicit commitment to shareholders to regularly pay them cash flows, that is generally going to come from companies who have the ability to generate cash on a steady state throughout an economic cycle, mindful they don't want to stop doing that for investors. So if you're looking for something that's going to give you resilience, companies that pay dividends can be a good source of that.
There are already many global equity income strategies in the market, and so how does Aviva Investors' strategy differ from its competitors?
Yeah, the short answer is searching outside traditional income sectors to keep pace when markets go up. But perhaps if I explain that a little bit. You're right, there's lots of other very good global equity income strategies in the market. And like our strategy, they do a really, I'd say a pretty good job. When markets go down, typically they go down less, providing some protection or resilience. However, where we think other global equity income strategies may fall a bit short is when markets tend to rise. And over the long term, markets do tend to go up. So for us, this is where it gets quite interesting to search in non-traditional income sectors. Sectors such as industrials and technology, where you can find really interesting income paying stocks. And it's something we've been doing a lot of in the 12 plus years we've been running the strategy. Let's take technology for a second. If you go back 20 years and you looked at the S&P 500 tech sector, only about 20% of companies paid dividend. Fast forward to now, that number is about 60% and increasing. So because of this approach, yes, we can protect on the downside, which is what you would expect for a global equity income, but because of this innovative addition, we can also keep pace when markets rise.
You mentioned the long term. What are your expectations for the next 12 months?
Firstly, I would love a crystal ball so I could tell you exactly what they are. Sadly, I'm not blessed with one. But what I'm most confident in is expect volatility. Expect volatility in the next 12 months. Some of the reasons we covered earlier, there's reasons to worry, and we've seen drawdowns already in the markets. Whether you think of DeepSeek, which everyone seems to have forgotten about in January, where it looked like the AI bubble had not quite burst, but become vulnerable, to Liberation Day, there is plenty more that could happen with that. So we think having some resilience to protect against future volatility could be very beneficial for clients. However, despite markets being around all-time highs, what's driving that could still continue to deliver and continue to see markets grind higher from here. You could get further interest rate cuts, which could be supportive. So investors also have to be mindful to have enough in their portfolios to keep pace should that happen.
Thank you so much. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen. Bis zum nächsten Mal.